But, that was a time in my life when I was yes, sir, no, sir, how high can I jump, sir? And you sit there and you go, I have really strong thoughts and opinions on a creative matter. And, someone else on another movie I remember made a creative decision. I thought, wow, that's a nail in a coffin that I alone will lie in. and it's true. I mean, they don't say this producer's movie flopped or this director's. That's me. Mm-hmm. So if I'm going to be on that headline, I'd like to be the architect of my own demise. Or
Hey besties, Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds' obscene demands of Wayfair are actually caught on recorded call. That's right. Do you remember Blake and Ryan? They had this kerfuffle with Wayfair around the time of the film premiere, and that the film premiere and Blake Lively telling basically everyone to unfollow Baldoni, forcing Baldoni to do a premiere on his own, not allowed on the red carpet with any other of the cast, and has the entire cast unfollow him. And we know now that Ryan was running his mouth, running all over all over Hollywood, including to his agents at WME, and using his agents and Sony to force Baldoni and Wayfair to concede. Well, now we have recorded phone calls. And apparently these are evidence in this case. We don't have them yet, but Jamie Heath admits they exist. He recorded phone calls not only with WME, which is the talent agency that was repping both Ryan and Blake along with Baldoni and Wayfair, but also he has recorded calls with Sony. The information about these calls was actually filed as an exhibit in court yesterday. Wayfair had to respond to Blake Lively's motion for sanctions because she claimed that they had spoliated, which means they had deleted evidence, and she was asking for very severe sanctions, including that Wayfair could not have a defense that there was no alleged smear campaign, right? And so they filed a 30-page response in a motion, and then they attached 40 or 60 documents to prove their claims. And while I'm not going to go into the whole details because I honestly don't know how the judge is going to rule, I don't think in the way that it's presented by Lively that she has much proof to prove that they intentionally deleted evidence. And I think that Wayfair's team does a really good job of breaking down why that they didn't intentionally delete evidence. She's not prejudiced because she has tons of evidence that she claims proves it. They also have evidence of their own that proves that Blake Lively was running her own smear campaign. They spoke quite a bit in this motion about how Blake was the cause of her demise herself. She's the one that created the bad press. She's the one that made decisions to market alcohol. She's the one that made the decision to exclude him from Baldoni from the premiere, and all of her choices through the process and contributed to what happened, and they had nothing to do with it. And they claim that Blake Lively herself told them through this lawsuit that she saw spikes in negative press on August 6th. They didn't even have Jed Wallace on staff by then, or as a contractor by then. So how then do they explain the August 6th, right? And then then they also say how did by this date did Jed turned the entire internet after her in 2 days? It would be impossible. So they have really good, valid arguments. But I'm more interested in the evidence, and the evidence that they attached are examples of WME and their conversations that prove that Blake was doing things to cause problems behind the scenes, which was why Wayfair needed to get crisis PR. And they're saying that this has zero to do with the sexual harassment claims. And in fact, in testimony that Jamie did, he revealed that he recorded his call with WME, Danny Greenberg. So it says, Danny then called me after the call with Patrick. He may have been on the call as Patrick as well as Danny. I just don't recall. He called me shortly after the call and was going to read us a letter that the Reynolds, I guess I can refer to both of them as the Reynolds, had written. and I could not believe what was happening. So I recorded it because I wanted it documented about the by Miss Shaw. And this was his deposition with Stephanie Jones, her attorneys. And it says, not only documented, he was going to dictate to me a letter. I didn't have a hard copy of it, so I wanted to record it so that I could actually write it down and have it. This was when they wanted them to put out that statement on August 12th. Okay. That's like, we aren't man enough and there were problems on the set and it's all our fault. That statement. So he has that call recorded where their wife, Lively, and her husband are demanding they take the fall for this. Okay. So that's all recorded. Then they ask, what about the Sony marketing call? So he says, in the Sony call, we were planning how to navigate these two different premieres, the ins and outs about it or whatever was or how it was gonna look. And we had, from what I believed, a really good relationship with Sony. But it started feeling like there was, and while I understand they kind of have to play middleman or whatever, they think is going on or not. So we don't have the next page, so I don't know what he's saying, but I think the gist here is that they believe they had a good relationship with Sony, not realizing that maybe Sony was beginning to take Blake Lively's side or was siding with Lively simply because Lively and her husband are more powerful. Let me be clear here. Wayfair is being generous when they call Blake Lively A-list. The only reason that Blake Lively would be considered A-list is because of the proximity she has to her husband. Ryan would be considered A-list, at least at this point, when this was all being filmed, because he had the Deadpool franchise. He was the highest paid actor next to The Rock in 2024. Deadpool and Wolverine grossed more than any other film, or maybe second that year, over $1 billion. Ryan is A-list because of his involvement in the Deadpool franchise. No other films that he have been in have come close to that success. So Ryan's success is really wrapped up in that relationship with Marvel, but that makes him quote unquote A-list. And then she has this proximity to these other A-listers, like obviously Taylor Swift. And so she doesn't have the kind of power that her husband has. And Sony is going to try to massage that because Ryan is a powerful person in Hollywood, given the fact of his amount of money he makes for these studios. And studios seem to only care about money. And unfortunately, in this case, Sony hung them out to dry. And it's unfortunate because at the end of the day, it was Wayfair that really Sony didn't come on until 2022 after 3 years, right? So like they had to put together an entire script. They had basically been working on the draft script for years. They had paid for the IP themselves. Sony doesn't own the IP in any capacity, right? And then when the filming happens, they're kind of forced to change gears because Sony's going to be the distributor. And so then Sony starts pushing in their agenda, which includes you need to hire Blake, you need to do this, you need to do that. The truth is that the bulk of the money that was put up for this film was put up by Wayfair. Listen to Steve Sorowitz's testimony about what he says occurred when it came to the premiere. He says, there's a couple other things. They had locked our entire team, including myself, put, as you mentioned, the 30 million figure into the movie, and they locked me completely out of the premiere. And along with Justin and Jamie and everyone else, and relegated us to the basement in a separate, and also not allowed us to be on the red carpet except in specified times. And I don't know if I mentioned this, isolated Justin from all of the publicity. So he was not allowed to do publicity with anyone else, not allowed to be photographed with anyone else. And I guess probably, believe it or not, and fired, this is probably the thing that bothered me the most, where she actively fired our editors, our composer, and our assistant producer, among other things, and had removed Justin from the poster, and then removed what Justin had in his cut from her cut, which was released. So think of it this way. Sony allowed Blake and Ryan to hijack a film that wasn't paid for by them. They did the distribution, meaning Sony is not paying for the production. They are paying for the distribution. They're going to be the marketing side of it. They're the ones that get it into theaters. You can't get a film into a theaters unless you get a studio to distribute it for you. So they're not paying for the production. They're paying for the distribution. Sony enabled Ryan and Blake to shut out the people that fronted the $30 million for this film to be made. Sony allowed her to fire editors, composers, and producers. None of this was in the contract with Sony. Sony shouldn't have these kinds of this kind of say, but they did because they're Sony, and there's no apparent there's no consequences for them. I mean, I guess the consequences are that the CEO of Sony that was a part of CEO is gone, and Josh, one of the main people that they were dealing with at Sony, he's left Sony, and the CEO of the bigger Sony has left, and there's been a huge uptick in influx of all the executives getting kicked out. I mean, Sony was in a state of chaos during this time. They had lost $71 million on 2 films that bombed that year, and they were desperate for a hit. And they needed this one to be the hit. And so what they did was they screwed Wayfair and hedged their money on Blake and Ryan when they didn't have the right to do that. If this were in any other industry, this would be theft, it would be coercion, it would be fraud, it would be extortion. $30 million was spent of his own money, Wayfair's money, Steve's money, and they don't get to go to the premiere. Ryan has hijacked films in the past. He hijacked Deadpool. He kicked Tim Miller out. He and Tim had a huge fight about the script for the second movie, and he willed his way and his version, and so Tim quit. He stole an entire franchise from Tim Miller, and Tim has described the entire experience as like PTSD, right? He has no problem doing this, and they tried to do this on the rhythm section. Blake attempted to have producers do her version. She wanted her script. She wanted her shots. There was such a fight during post-production that Barbara Broccoli, who does the Bond movies, they got into such a fight that they shelved the movie for 2 years because of what Blake was doing. They were not even going to release it. And then once it was released, the studio lost $50 million because of what Blake did. So she was box office poison, and they were forced to hire her because of Sony. And then Sony allows her to hijack the film. And Wayfair in their motion wrote, during the second phase of production, Lively moved to seize the control of production. Among other things, she wrestled control over editing, post-production, and marketing from Baldoni and Wayfair. Ultimately, Lively gained control over the post-production process. She attaches something from Blake. And then there's another line. It says, Lively also demanded that Baldoni's film by credit be removed. And then it's redacted. And for the exhibits for this, she cites something from Wayfair, something from Danny Greenberg's testimony, discovery from Sony, 2 exhibits from Sony, and Justin Baldoni's deposition. This means that their proof that Lively was systematically removing Wayfair from this film and taking these steps isn't just coming from their word. It's Sony's word. It's Blake's word. It's Danny Greenberg's word. And they write, Lively accomplished her takeover through threats, that if her demands were not met, she would not participate in marketing of the film, even though she was contractually obligated to do so. For that, they cite evidence from Baldoni, and then they also cite evidence from Sony. So this isn't something they're pulling out of thin air. They have it on record. We've seen some of these texts in the amended complaint in the timeline of relevant events where Sony is telling them that they have to, that she's threatening not to promote, she's threatening to do this, she's threatening to do that. So they have evidence directly from Sony proving that the fight was not about sexual harassment, it was about creative control. And then Baldoni's own testimony was that Blake demanded Sony remove his film by credit. He said she couldn't come to the premiere. She got all the cast to unfollow him on August 7th. And then he's not allowed to be at the premiere. He can't do any publicity with her. And then suddenly they're in a basement. And then she wonders why they needed crisis PR. And it was all because she hijacked the film because she wanted her moment. She wanted it to be her film. She didn't want him to take over her moment. She didn't want to share the spotlight. And then they wrote, not content with usurping Baldoni's role as director and excluding him from marketing of the film he developed, financed, directed, and starred in, she then sidelined, indeed banished him from the premiere, refusing to be photographed with him and demanding that he and his guests be hidden from sight and shunning Baldoni and his guests into another screening room. They have evidence for this from WME, the talent agency, Heath's deposition, Sorowitz's deposition, evidence from Wayfair. He was also barred from appearing with Lively in publicity, photos, or promotional appearances. Lively very publicly unfollowed him on social media. For this, about being unfollowed, this comes from Colleen Hoover. So they have evidence about what Blake was telling people about unfollowing him and Colleen Hoover's own testimony. And then they discuss how the public relations was fueled by Lively's attacks and the surging chatter over Discord on the film set hits the media on August 6th. And they say the rumors were fueled by, it's redacted. You know what the evidence for that is? Sony. Lively's unfollowing of Baldoni on social media and Lively's insistent that Baldoni be stripped of the credit filmed by Justin Baldoni on the movie he developed, sold, directed, and starred in. Lively also redacted, but this evidence comes from WME and Sony. Given the role of alcohol abuse in domestic violence cases, Lively used alcoholic drinks using her Betty Boo's alcohol products such as Rile You Wait and It Ends With Buzz at promotional events. The public backlash was immediate and unforgiving. And then they cite a New York Times article. Given the circumstances and her hostile conduct, they were understandably concerned about a potential onslaught of negative publicity from Lively. And that's why they hired Melissa Nathan. The point of this video, for all of you that are listening, if you've gotten this far, is that there's a reason why we are here today and why they didn't do a motion to dismiss, okay? Because if they hadn't done this, they wouldn't have the evidence to prove what Blake and Ryan did, right? They wouldn't have received the discovery from Sony. They wouldn't have received the discovery from WME. They wouldn't have been able to depose anyone. And they were able to do all of those things. And this is what they need to present to the public about what happened, right? Now, Ryan and Blake's evidence that's now under seal, they have until December 19th, right? The judge gave them an extension. He claims that he's not going to violate our rights as the public who fund the court transparency. He says that he will not rule on the summary judgments until after he unseals all these documents. So we will still have the right to see what's in here. We just have to wait. The unusual steps they're taking to seal just statements they're making and discussions about what happened is insane. Think of it this way. The Justice Department, which has been fighting about this unsealing or the release of the Epstein files, what has been released in the files thus far and in the court records and what is not sealed is more damning than Justin's text messages with Blake or Ryan Reynolds and Blake's text messages with Sony or with WME. There's nothing private, confidential at all about what this is. This is them concealing evidence because they don't want the public backlash. And so that's my opinion. So when it does become public, all of these tactics they're doing right now are delays. So every motion they file, every document they file, it's all in an effort to delay the inevitable of the public disclosure of what the evidence is. And while there will be evidence that will not be favorable to Wayfair because nobody's perfect in this situation, there's going to be things that were said by Wayfair that people won't agree with. Justin, no one in this situation is perfect. I mean, that we need to be clear. Like, this was a hostile environment. Blake and Ryan are the driving perpetrators here. But I'm sure when stuff becomes out and full documents and testimony comes out, you might see things that you're like, I don't know if I like this. I don't know if I can back this. This is weird that they said this. I mean, that will happen because none of us are perfect, right? But it's not the culpability in this situation and why all of these documents are being filed and all of these motions is because Ryan and Blake are trying to delay this stuff coming out. They know there's recorded calls that are now show how insane they are with WME and the threats that they were making to them. They know there's deposition testimony of Danny Greenberg and other WME professionals and agents testifying to the threats and the coercion and the extortion that was happening, right? They know that there is a recorded call with Sony about the premiere. They know all of this. And if they're talking about the premiere, that's also being relayed to them what Ryan is making threats about, calling Justin a sexual predator and running around everywhere telling him he's a sexual predator when nothing of the sort occurred. Ryan's only belief that he is a sexual predator is because of his book. And he said in his book that there may have been times in his youth that he crossed boundaries and lines when it came to consent, because back when we were young, that's what happened. We didn't say, "Can I kiss you?" We didn't say, "Can I hold your hand?" I mean, that's where we are in consent these days, asking for a kiss, asking to hold a hand, respecting body autonomy. We didn't do that growing up. I'm 5 years older than Justin. If you wanted to kiss someone, you just kissed someone. And then you found out after the fact if they didn't want to do that. Does that mean he's a rapist? No. No. The only one that's publicly admitted to groping a woman is Ryan. He did that to Olivia Wilde on a set that he did with Jason Bateman, The Change Up. There have been other actresses that there's been loose accusations against him and people claiming all kinds of weird things about Ryan. None of the same for Baldoni. Nothing equivalent. WME has been wrapped up with sexual harassment claims for years. They have been part of so many different scandals throughout the years, including their former employee suing them. I told you about that. I've told you about that many times. They're wrapped up in the WWE litigation. They're wrapped up in so many discrimination cases against them, sexual harassment cases against them. They're not perfect. Ari Emanuel is no longer the head of WME now. He's more over on the other side. That all happened after this came out. Heads have rolled because of this. And just because you're not seeing it doesn't mean it hasn't happened. Since this has been, just to give you clarity, Ryan has signed on for projects with Amazon and with Netflix, but he has not signed on with a major studio for a theatrical film in years. The next theatrical film that he has coming out is like an animated movie about animals. But then the two projects he's producing and maximum effort is developing may never come to fruition. Ryan has been rejected with scripts by Sony or by Disney and by Marvel. He has pitched so much to Disney and they have said they've shut him down over and over and over. Blake has not signed with anyone for a 2-theater movie since this happened. She signed on for a streaming film that will probably never be created. So there have been real life consequences. And I think that's part of the reason why Blake and Ryan are digging their heels. But I'll also say that, like, they have the records, they have the recorded calls, they have Sony and WME now giving them evidence. It's really unfortunate that Wayfair can't sue Sony and for what they've done, because they did frustrate this entire experience and allowed Blake and Ryan to hijack this. They made money on the film, but it wasn't the film they created. And as the creators and the financiers and the people that literally paid for everything and put the entire, paid all of the salaries for everyone, they were in charge of the film It Ends With Us Movie LLC. No one else. Blake and Ryan hijacked $30 million and somehow they became the face of the movie. In no other industry would this happen but Hollywood. So they're caught on recorded calls. What are your thoughts about that? Tell me in the comments below. Please make sure to give this video a thumbs up. Make sure to subscribe to my channel if you haven't subscribed and click the bell so you never miss a video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye, besties.